In 2010, amidst a winter blanketed in ice in Fort Collins, 36-year-old veterinary technician Elena Marston left her small house on Maple Street with her dog Buddy. She told her husband she was going out for a little air. 2 hours later, the silver Volvo S40 was gone from the garage, and Elena never returned. No accident, no car wreck, no clues. After 2 weeks of searching, police concluded she might have slipped on the ice into Horsetooth Reservoir during the icy night. Her husband David collected the insurance money and listened to reassurances that perhaps Elena just wanted to disappear and start anew. Rumors spread throughout the small town that she was having an affair. Friends stopped mentioning her name, and the incident slowly faded, becoming nothing more than a winter tragedy. Then, 13 years later, during a review of old files, the Colorado Bureau of Investigation reopened case file 1011-3. A hair sample sealed for over a decade was sent for testing using DNA genealogy technology. The results sent shockwaves across the entire state. Elena's Volvo had once been pulled from the lake with the handbrake down, lights off, and the driver's seat pulled all the way back, a position she couldn't possibly have reached. Under her fingernails, technicians that year noted a strange strand of hair, but the technology at the time couldn't analyze it. When the DNA data was decoded, the name that surfaced first was not that of a stranger, but of someone she once knew, someone who was obsessed with water and who never left the state of Colorado. Someone was with Elena in that car that night. Someone staged a perfect accident. Before we dive deeper into this shocking true story, please let us know where you are watching from, and if you love journeys to find forgotten justice, don't forget to subscribe so you don't miss the next part. The January night in Fort Collins was covered in a thin mist, with winds sweeping down from the Rockies, carrying a biting cold that made the small streets seem to shrink in silence. In the house at the end of Maple Street, 36-year-old Elena Marston, a veterinary technician at a local clinic, was still sitting by the window after the whole neighborhood had turned off their lights. She was typically careful and thoughtful, but recently she had been quieter, often staring absently through the misted glass, as if pondering something unspoken. Elena put on a gray wool coat, wrapped a scarf around her neck, and called Buddy, her beloved golden Labrador, to follow her to the garage. The silver Volvo S40 started, its headlights illuminating the thin layer of snow covering the driveway. She turned back and said to her husband, her voice light as a breath, "I'm going out for a bit of air." David simply nodded, thinking she needed a little peace after a long day at the clinic. He did not realize that would be the last time he ever saw his wife. The garage door closed, the sound of the engine slowly blending into the dense night, leaving the house utterly silent. When David woke up, the space was strangely intact. He didn't hear Buddy running around, nor did he see the kitchen light Elena usually turned on every morning. The bed was flat, and her phone, left on the table, was off. In the garage, the cold, empty space where the Volvo usually parked, made him freeze for a long moment. He tried to reassure himself that perhaps his wife just went for a walk or slept over at someone's house, but with each passing call going unanswered, the worry tightened its grip. He contacted a few acquaintances. Elena's best friend didn't know where she went, colleagues said she wasn't scheduled for a shift, and neighbors only recalled hearing a car leave after the street had fallen asleep. Every answer was the same. No one knew where Elena was. The sky outside was gray, and snow was sparsely falling on the roof. David made coffee but couldn't drink it. Another cup, Elena's, still sat in the corner of the table, the water long cold. Everything in the small house remained as it was, only missing the woman who always opened the curtains to welcome the first sunlight every morning. A sense of emptiness spread across the walls, seeping through every room, making the space feel frozen. Unable to bear it any longer, David put on his coat and drove straight to the Larimer County Sheriff's Office. He approached the duty counter, his voice trembling but firm. "My wife left last night and hasn't returned. She hasn't called and didn't take anything with her." The officer looked up, recognizing that this was not the typical report of an overly worried person. He closed his notebook and pulled out a new report form. "Her full name, Elena Marston," David replied, 36 years. Just minutes later, the information was entered into the system and sent to the field investigation team. This case was flagged as high risk. An adult woman missing overnight, taking a pet, no contact, no personal belonging. Lieutenant Tom Herrera, the Larimer County lead investigator, was immediately called to the command room. He had handled dozens of missing persons cases, but experience told him that when someone leaves their home in the middle of winter without preparation, it is rarely simple. Herrera arrived at the Marston home with 2 officers. They walked through the quiet house, checking the garage, the desk, the landline, and noting every detail. On the kitchen counter, Elena's half-finished coffee cup remained from the night before. In the bedroom, the bedding was neat, the handbag was in its usual place, only the car keys and the wool coat were missing. A technician brought an evidence photography kit, recording the tire marks in the garage and comparing them with the family's registered vehicle model. There were no signs of forced entry or struggle. Doors and windows were locked from the inside. From the information David provided, Herrera established the priority route, the shortest path from the residential area to Horsetooth Reservoir, where Elena often took Buddy for walks. He considered this the most plausible location if she had an accident. A patrol team was dispatched immediately that morning to survey the area, carrying topographical maps and handheld metal detectors to find car shells or debris. The previous night's snow had covered the roads, wiping away all tire tracks. Police only noted a few old skid marks, none matching the Volvo S40's tires. At noon, Herrera returned to headquarters to update the data. He requested the technical department to extract traffic camera footage along the route to the lake, and also contacted gas stations within a 10-mile radius. An attendant at a gas station on Canyon Fort Road reported seeing a brown-haired woman driving a silver car, with a large dog, fueling up and leaving alone the night before. The card payment data matched a credit card in Elena's name. The transaction time was about 10 hours from when David discovered she was missing. The results from the traffic cameras also reinforced this finding. Elena's silver Volvo appeared in 3 different frames, the last time at the intersection near Satanka Bridge, before disappearing from all other cameras. Herrera sketched the movement path on the map, marking the last known point with a red pen. He looked at the map and nodded slightly, requesting the patrol group to cordon off that area to search for tire marks or dropped items. Meanwhile, another team was sent to every house around the lake to ask for witnesses. An elderly fisherman reported seeing car headlights reflecting on the water the night before, staying still for a while, then turning off completely. No one knew the exact location, only vaguely near the western shore, where the lake bed was deep and there were no barriers. Herrera cautiously noted the testimony, ordering a search of 3 points with access to the water, where a car could have approached. In the afternoon, a temporary command post was set up right by the lake shore. The temperature dropped sharply, and part of the water surface was already frozen. Rescue teams and technicians installed sonar equipment to scan the lake bottom, dividing the search area according to the coordinates provided by Herrera. Radar waves reflected on the screen as faint streaks of light, mostly submerged rocks or floating logs, but in the area, 40 feet from the shore, there was a thicker than usual reflective shape. The technician marked the coordinates, planning to send divers down to check the next morning. As the sun set, the rescue vehicle lights reflected on the cold water. Herrera stood by the lake's edge, meticulously noting details in his old leather notebook. He knew well, after the first 12 hours, the chance of finding a missing person alive rapidly decreases. A cold gust of wind blew snowflakes onto his face, and he looked out at the dark water, which reflected the flashing red light of the police cars. 2 hypotheses formed in his mind: an accident due to ice, or an encounter that led Elena here, and from which she never returned. 3 days passed since Elena Marston was reported missing, and the weather in Fort Collins grew increasingly severe. Cold winds from the Rockies blew down, forming an additional thin layer of ice on Horsetooth Reservoir, hindering all search effort. Rescue teams had scanned with sonar multiple times, but only received weak signals, mixed with thick interference from rocks and tree trunks at the bottom. Lieutenant Tom Herrera had not yet allowed the operation to conclude. He believed that if Elena had indeed had an accident, the car couldn't have drifted far. It had to be somewhere in the still water near the shore. On the morning of the 4th day, the Depth Finders civilian search team, a volunteer group specializing in assisting police with missing persons cases, was invited to join. They brought high-power side-scan sonar equipment capable of imaging the lake floor topography at depths greater than 20 meters. Before the sun could fully dispel the fog, The small boats of depth finders were sliding out into the middle of the lake. The sonar screen scanned continuously, displaying countless faint shadows beneath the water. Tom stood on the shore, arms crossed, watching the sequence of devices transmitting data directly to the computer in the command vehicle. Mid-morning, a technician called out, "There's something here." A rectangular shape with straight edges appeared on the screen, about 4 meters long and nearly 1.5 meters high, a size comparable to a sedan. The coordinates showed Satanka Cove, a narrow and relatively deep area in the northern part of the lake, which the search team had not reached before due to the thick ice. The image reflection was uniform, the shadow clear, unlike submerged rocks or logs. Herrera looked at the screen with a single glance. He knew what he was seeing. "That's the car," he said softly. No one in the team replied, only the sound of the scanner and the wind whistling across the lake's surface. Rescue forces immediately moved equipment to the marked area. An ice drill was deployed, creating a hole large enough for an underwater camera to descend. Under the pale white light, the lens gradually revealed a metal object covered in mud and moss, the roof dimly reflecting the light. The Volvo logo peeked out from the cold mud. The whole team was silent for a few seconds, then without another word, they got to work. The salvage operation was carried out that same afternoon. Due to the depth being only about 8 meters and the calm water conditions, the rescue team used 2 steel cables connected to a crane on a specialized vehicle. As the silver Volvo S40 gradually emerged from the water, the cold air wafted out like steam. The car body was intact, windows closed, and a thick layer of mud covered the glass. When the door was opened, the heavy smell of stagnant water and engine oil wafted out. Inside, Elena Marston was in the driver's seat, seatbelt still fastened, her head leaning towards the window. Buddy, her dog, was curled up behind the passenger seat, his body frozen in a contracted position. A silent scene enveloped the lake. Police stepped back, yielding to the forensic team. Herrera walked up, peering through the fogged window before the car was covered with a sealed tarp. The car door was locked, the handbrake was down, the lights were off, and the gear selector was in D. The clock on the dashboard stopped at 11:58, coinciding with the time of the last call from Elena's phone on the night she disappeared. The car was transported to the county's inspection yard, while the body was moved to the morgue for autopsy. Herrera said nothing on the drive back, only silently noting every detail: the car's condition, the victim's posture, the weather, the depth. Everything seemed too perfect for an accident. No skid marks at the entry point, no signs of heavy impact on the car body, intact windows. A young officer asked, "Could she have driven into the lake herself, sir?" Herrera only looked out the car window, his voice low. "Possible, but if so, why was the driver's seat pulled all the way back? She was only 5 feet, 3 inches tall." News of the car's discovery spread quickly in the area. Local press gathered at the Fort Collins police station gates, awaiting official information. The Marston family was briefly informed, without details, only that Elena and Buddy have been found. David grew silent as he signed the identification protocol, his face almost emotionless. He briefly looked at the photo taken from the scene, the silver car being pulled up, covered in mud and snow, then bowed his head, saying not a word more. That evening, the light in Herrera's office was still on. He reviewed the sonar map, zooming in on the Satanka Cove area. The location of the discovery was only 45 feet from the shore, at a depth of about 8 meters, entirely within still water. Herrera took a red pen and drew a circle around the coordinates, then noted, "No slope steep enough for the car to slide down on its own. Need to determine how the car reached this position." Outside the window, snow began to fall again. Horsetooth Reservoir lay still in the darkness, reflecting the flashing light of the temporary police station. Elena's disappearance was no longer a story about a woman who drove out for a walk in the middle of a winter night. It had officially become an investigation into the cause of death, and Tom Herrera knew that, from the moment the Volvo was pulled up, all the questions had just begun. The next morning, Fort Collins remained overcast, and bitterly cold like the frozen surface of the lake. In the Larimer County morgue, fluorescent lights shone down on the steel table where Elena Marston's body lay, wrapped in the white sheet, just retrieved from the ambulance. The only sounds in the room were the scratching of a pen and the steady beep of monitoring equipment. Forensic pathologist Lisa Grant, who had handled hundreds of drowning cases, leaned down and began her documentation. When the sheet was pulled back, Elena's whole body was revealed, pale, stiff skin, wet hair tangled in clumps. Beside her the dog Buddy was placed in a separate sealed bag, confirmed to have died from drowning asphyxiation. Grant performed an initial check, noting clearly in the report, victim wearing jeans, gray wool coat, seatbelt buckled, no major open wound. All initial external signs pointed to death by drowning, fluid in the lungs, cyanosis of the nails and lips, eyes half open. However, as the examination continued, a few details caused Grant to pause. A faint bruise was visible on Elena's neck, extending horizontally just below the left jaw, not deep, but distinct. Under the light, the dark bruise line was visibly different from marks caused by post-mortem impact. She leaned in closer, using a magnifying glass. "Not from the seatbelt, the angle is wrong," she murmured to her assistant. On her fingers, 2 fingernails were broken, with dried blood beneath the nail beds, a typical sign of the victim struggling or grasping just before death. While cleaning debris from under the nails, Grant discovered a dark brown hair strand caught in the tissue. The sample was carefully taken, sealed separately, and immediately sent to the DNA analysis lab. This was the first detail suggesting the possible presence of another person with Elena in the car, or before the car sank. Fluid samples from the lungs and stomach were tested for toxicology. The results were negative. No alcohol, sedatives, or drug. This meant Elena was fully conscious when she went into the water, and had not been poisoned or knocked out beforehand. Consequently, the initial hypothesis of suicide raised by some was almost immediately dismissed. Concurrently, the mechanical engineering team completed their vehicle inspection report. They noted, no signs of severe impact on the car body, no scratches on the underside, intact glass. The airbags had not deployed, the engine was properly shut off, the gear shift was in drive, and the handbrake was down. There was no indication the car had been hit, slid, or free-fallen into the water, events which should have left dents, cracks, or frame warping. Notably, the driver's seat was pushed back to the maximum, nearly 20 centimeters from Elena's usual driving position. Given her height, driving in that posture would have been almost impossible. Tom Herrera was present when the technical team presented their findings. He sat silently listening to every detail, making brief notes in his pad. When the technician concluded that the car may have been slowly driven into the lake, Herrera asked again, his voice steady but firm, meaning someone else was driving. The technician hesitated. Or the car was intentionally controlled, not an accident. In the afternoon, Herrera took all the documents to the morgue for cross-referencing. Dr. Grant pointed to the photograph of Elena's neck. "Look at this bruise is in an odd position. It doesn't align with the seatbelt, nor is it caused by water pressure. It appeared when her heart was still beating. And the hair sample, she said it would take at least a week for the DNA results, but affirmed, it's not the victim's hair." Herrera fell silent. What he saw at the scene now had a clearer explanation. The car had not randomly slid into the lake. A human hand was involved. But who, and how, when all the doors were locked from the inside? He wrote one last note in his pad. Intact car, victim died in water environment. Bruise on the neck area, broken nails, abnormal driver's seat adjustment, possible second person. When Herrera left the morgue, dusk had already fallen. The sunset reflected on the thin layer of snow, creating a cold gray palette. He paused on the steps, looking toward Horsetooth Reservoir, where the investigation had now completely changed direction. It was no longer about understanding an accident. With the evidence just discovered, Herrera knew for sure someone had been with Elena in her final moments. When the forensic report landed on Lieutenant Tom Herrera's desk, he knew he had entered a new phase of the investigation. No longer speculation, but evidence confrontation. The details of the neck bruise, broken nails, and strange hair strand made all accident theories weak. But to prove the presence of another person, Herrera needed something more concrete. Electronic data, which the cold water could not completely erase. Elena's phone was found 2 days later, in a vacant lot over a mile from her home. A snow removal worker spotted an object peeking out from under the melting ice, an iPhone 3GS, with a shattered screen and a dented back casing. Despite being submerged, the internal memory still held the potential for recovery. The Digital Forensics Unit of the Colorado Bureau of Investigation (CBI) quickly took possession of the device. Technician Ryan Kemp was in charge of decoding, an expert in extracting data from damaged devices. He told Herrera, "If the data hasn't been overwritten, I'll be able to pull everything back." The work took nearly 48 hours. From the phone's memory, Ryan recovered part of the call log and text messages. The results showed Elena made only 3 calls on the night she went missing, one to her husband in the evening, one to her best friend, and a final call at 11:59 p.m., lasting 2 minutes and 40 seconds. The recipient's number did not show a name, only a strange sequence of digits, belonging to a prepaid subscription. The service provider confirmed the number was unregistered, activated on the same day at a small store in Greeley, about 40 miles from Fort Collins. The SIM card used was the kind that does not store buyer information, just topped up, used and discarded. Herrera looked at the statistics table, silent for a moment. "Someone didn't want to be recognized," he said, and Elena spoke with them right before she disappeared. Besides the call data, Ryan also recovered a chain of unsent draft messages, written around 11:45 p.m. "If you come, we'll talk one last time." The message was never sent. The timestamp was just minutes before Elena was recorded by the gas station camera. Cross-referencing BTS data showed her phone connected to the cell tower near Canyon Fort Road, heading towards Horsetooth Reservoir. After midnight, the signal disappeared completely. In parallel, the police department's technical team extracted all video footage from the gas station Elena visited. The footage was blurry, with only 2 angles, one from the entrance, and one pointing towards pump number 3. The images showed Elena driving her silver Volvo to a stop, getting out, filling the tank, paying cash, and driving away. Inside the car, the shadow of the dog Buddy could be seen sitting in the back seat, turning his head to look out the window. Up to this point, everything seemed normal, until Ryan slowly rewound the final frames. In the distance, in the lower left corner of the screen, a man's silhouette briefly appeared, dark jacket, baseball cap, stepping out from the restroom area behind the station. He paused for a few seconds, looked toward Elena, and then turned away. His face was completely obscured. Herrera stopped the frame, zooming in on each one. Despite the poor quality, he recognized that the man had a slight limp, and his left arm moved stiffly. That small detail was noted in the report, like an unanswered question mark. While Herrera focused on the video, the technical team continued processing the cell tower BTS data to reconstruct the trajectory of Elena's phone. They determined the phone traveled from her home to the gas station, and then toward the reservoir, the exact direction Herrera had surmised. However, there was an anomaly. After Elena's phone signal was lost, another device, also on the same network area, came online only a few hundred meters away, within 5 minutes later. The subscriber number of that device did not match, but it used the same type of anonymous. 2 phones appeared in the same coverage area, then both vanished from the system. Herrera folded his arms, looking at the map displayed on the screen. 2 red dots overlapped and then both turned off. "It's no coincidence," he told Ryan. They met. By the end of the day, when all the data was collected, Herrera convened a small meeting with the investigation team. On the whiteboard he wrote 4 lines: last call, anonymous number, unregistered, unsent message. "If you come, 2 devices lost signal in the reservoir area, simultaneously. Strange silhouette in the gas station camera." He looked around the silent room. Someone tried to wipe out the traces, but technology doesn't lie. Elena contacted an acquaintance, and possibly, that was the last person she met. Herrera requested a check on the SIM card, but the results showed Elena's SIM had been removed before the phone was thrown away. Someone had intentionally disconnected the device from the network, causing location tracking to fail. Throwing the phone a mile from home could not have been a random act. To Herrera, this was no longer a missing person case due to an accident. As he left the technical room, he paused in the long corridor, the yellow light illuminating the damp floor. Outside the snow was falling heavier, reflecting the red light of the patrol cars. He sighed softly, the words he had just written in his notebook, echoing in his mind. Someone tried to erase Elena from this world, starting with the phone. 2 days after the technical team reported on the phone and the gas station video, Lieutenant Tom Herrera returned to the investigation desk, with the first question to resolve: what truly happened between the Marstons? He began with the only person left in that house, David Marston. The interrogation took place in a room with plain gray walls at the police station. David looked exhausted, his eyes deeply shadowed from sleepless nights. Herrera spoke slowly, avoiding leading questions that might provoke a reaction. I just need to understand your life together. David nodded, his voice hoarse. We were fine, she was just working too hard. The answer did not convince Herrera. His experience told him that normalcy was sometimes a shell for long-simmering conflicts. Investigators reviewed the Marston family's financial record. They discovered Elena had a life insurance policy worth $250,000, with David as the beneficiary. His income report was stable, but there were a few unpaid credit card debts. Tom did not overlook that detail. Have you ever considered using this money to settle debt? David looked him straight in the eye, his voice calmly chilling. I just want her back. I don't need the money. Subsequently, David was asked to take a polygraph test. The questions focused on 3 points: whether he harmed his wife, whether he knew anyone who might harm her, and whether he knew whom she planned to meet that night. Results: no signs of deception. The attendance record from the hospital where he worked as a refrigeration engineer showed he was present for his shift from 9 p.m. to 6 a.m., consistent with the time Elena went missing. Colleagues confirmed this. The alibi report was stamped as verified. In parallel with the interrogation, the financial unit investigated the couple's spending habits. No unusual transfers, no hidden debts. The most recent payments were for electricity, the supermarket, and the Volvo's maintenance fee, all perfectly reasonable. Financial motive was ruled out. Herrera began asking about personal relationships. Elena's close friends were invited in for questioning. Paula Green, her best friend, said they talked that night. Elena didn't sound sad or panicked, but said she needed to meet someone to get things sorted out once and for all. When Herrera asked who that person was, Paula hesitated before mentioning a name: Jeff Connolly, a warehouse manager where Elena had previously worked part-time. She said Elena had received a few messages from Jeff, more than just professional. These details drew the investigation room's attention. When reviewing the call data, they saw Jeff's number appearing multiple times in the last week. Cell tower location showed his phone signal active near Fort Collins on the night Elena went missing, even though his company was in Longmont over 60 miles away. Police noted, contact outside work hours, overlapping range with Horsetooth Reservoir area. Before leaving the department, Herrera sat down to summarize his notes in the investigation journal. David Marston, solid alibi, stable polygraph, no financial motive. Personal relationship: Jeff Connolly's name appears, needs verification. That night, as he left the building, the wind from the Rockies still blew bitingly cold across the parking lot. Herrera paused, looking at the white layer of snow on the hood of his car, and thought about David's eyes in the interrogation room, empty, tired, but not deceitful. Yet in the file before him, a new name had emerged: Jeff Connolly, carrying with it questions no one wanted the answers to. The name Jeff Connolly appeared in the report for the first time, but the way it was connected to the case caught Herrera's attention. This man was not only a former co-worker, but also the person Elena had wanted to talk to one last time. Connolly, 39, was a manager at a construction supply warehouse in Longmont, and had supervised Elena when she worked weekend shifts there a few years prior. His personnel file was clean: no criminal record, no violations, a stable resignation, and a move to another company in the same area. But when the investigation team reviewed Elena's phone data, they discovered Jeff's number appeared 5 times in the week before she vanished, and twice on the same day she left home. The final message was sent at that night, just over half an hour before Elena was recorded by the gas station camera. Herrera ordered a verification of Jeff's whereabouts on the night of January 9th. Longmont police reported that he had finished his shift at the mechanical forensics unit. Also compared the soil clinging to Jeff's tires with sediment from the Satanka Cove area. The result: the soil was similar in clay and organic composition. However, this type of soil was also common around Horsetooth Reservoir and could not be used as evidence for an indictment. When questioned a second time, Jeff maintained his original statement. He said he had only been driving around that evening to relax, and might have mistakenly driven toward the Fort Collins outskirts. That vague explanation made Herrera feel that something was deliberately being hidden. He observed how Jeff placed his hands, how he looked straight ahead but avoided eye contact when the questions mentioned Elena. His gut feeling, something he had trusted for 20 years on the job, told him this man knew more than he was telling. However, in the case file, all evidence stopped at the level of suspicion. There was no biological trace confirming Jeff had been in Elena's car. No witnesses saw them together that night. No cameras recorded the pickup truck entering the reservoir area. Despite this, Herrera did not remove Jeff's name from the list. He marked a red flag on the chart, writing next to it, potential involvement, high, motive, jealousy, or personal conflict. Before ending the workday, Herrera reviewed the gas station video one more time. In the blurry frame, a man in a dark jacket and a baseball cap appeared for a few seconds, his walk slightly limping. He zoomed in on the frame and placed Jeff's photo next to it. Shoulder posture, height, leg stance, all matched. Not enough to charge him, but enough to make him believe this was not just a coincidence. Herrera closed the file, his eyes resting on the last line of his handwritten note. No direct evidence, but if this is a homicide, he is the first person I'll look for. Outside the window, snow was falling lightly. Horsetooth Reservoir, not far away, was shrouded in the silent night. Somewhere out there, Herrera was certain, Jeff Connolly was trying to live normally with a secret he would eventually expose. In the weeks that followed, the Elena Marston case gradually became a dead-end labyrinth. Despite every investigative avenue converging on Jeff Connolly, the Larimer County Sheriff's Office was unable to produce any physical evidence sufficient for an indictment. The DNA analysis result, from the strange hair under Elena's fingernail, came back from the Colorado State Laboratory with a brief note, insufficient genetic material for comparison. In the official record, the line was printed in bold, like a cold period stopping all progress. DNA analysis technology in 2010 was still limited. Microsamples, like a wet piece of hair, soft tissue decomposed underwater, were nearly impossible to fully extract. Forensic pathologist Lisa Grant could only shake her head. I tried everything. If we had a few more viable cells, we could make a match. But the cold water and time had wiped out every opportunity. Tom Herrera was not easy to convince. He requested more time to corroborate the evidence around Jeff Connolly. Travel routes, phone signals, soil comparison results. However, each piece remained fragmented, missing a crucial link. The district attorney reminded him that we cannot indict based solely on a hunch. Herrera understood, but his intuition refused to let go. Just as the investigation was being squeezed by the silence, a new witness emerged. A middle-aged man named Roy Miller called the hotline, claiming he saw a silver car lose control on the road down to the reservoir on the night of the incident. He recounted that he was driving a delivery truck at the time, saw the car's lights wobble, and then disappear around the bend. I thought it was just a minor accident, so I didn't stop, he said. The testimony was immediately given to Herrera. Although he felt skeptical, as Roy only reported it after nearly 3 weeks, he still dispatched the technical team to the area described by the man. The result, no skid marks, no debris, no tire tracks were found. Nearby traffic camera data also did not record any car other than Elena's Volvo. When questioned again, Roy fumbled. Maybe I was mistaken, it was very dark. Nonetheless, the local news had already aired a quote from the witness, suggesting Elena might have lost control due to ice. From then on, public opinion began to shift. Newspapers ran headlines, "Winter Tragedy at Horsetooth Reservoir," "Ill-fated technician dies in accident on icy road." Smaller papers even framed the incident as a testament to the dangers of nighttime driving in the Colorado foothill. These articles spread quickly, leading the public to believe the Elena Marston case had been solved. Public pressure on the police gradually decreased, and that's when Herrera's superiors began requesting to close the file and tie up loose ends. In the internal meeting, the head of the investigation unit read a brief conclusion: no evidence of a crime, no direct witnesses, no matching DNA. The case is classified as a traffic accident resulting in death. Tom Herrera sat at the end of the table, gripping his pen tightly, silently listening to every word. He knew that once the file was moved to cold case storage, the likelihood of reopening it was virtually zero, at least for the next few years. When the meeting ended, colleagues gathered their papers, leaving only Herrera behind. He reopened the crime scene photo album, the silver Volvo being pulled from the water, the body of the car unusually clean, the parking brake released, the driver's seat pushed far back. Then he looked at the photo of Jeff Connolly, a cold face, eyes avoiding the lens. An uneasy feeling arose. Everything was too clean, as if someone had staged everything to fit a perfect accident. He opened his notebook and wrote a few lines in a firm hand. Accident theory is unconvincing. Bruising on neck. Driver's seat abnormal adjustment. Last contact with Jeff Connolly before disappearance. Reevaluate when new forensic technology is available. Herrera clipped the note to the file cover before submitting it to the records department. He understood that one day, when someone cared enough to reopen this file, that note would be a reminder that the Elena Marston case was never truly solved. That evening he returned to Horsetooth Reservoir alone. The water had frozen over again, terrifyingly still. The moonlight reflected on the ice, cold and emotionless. He stood by the water's edge for a long time, clutching his small notebook. In the night wind, Herrera whispered, as if to himself, "No one falls into a reservoir and leaves behind a scene that perfect. No one." He turned away, his silhouette blending into the fading snow. Behind him the reservoir lay silent, enveloped in a thick stillness, the silence of cases that appeared closed but were never truly finished. After the case was officially closed with the conclusion of traffic accident, Jeff Connolly vanished from the sight of the Larimer County Sheriff's Office almost immediately. News of Elena Marston's death quietly faded from the front page of the local papers, and Connolly's name gradually disappeared from internal reports. But for Lieutenant Tom Herrera, that name was still like a sour note, jarring in a melody that was supposed to have ended. A few weeks after the file was sealed, Herrera received unofficial information from a contact in the Department of Labor that Jeff had submitted his resignation from the Longmont warehouse. The reason was briefly noted: relocation. Personal reasons. No one at the company knew exactly where he went, only rumors of him moving south to start over. When police verified, Jeff had terminated his lease, canceled his mobile phone number, and moved to Colorado Springs, nearly 200 miles from Fort Collins. With the official file closed, Herrera no longer had jurisdiction for surveillance. He could only record this move in the case's addendum. However, the feeling of unease would not leave him. One late afternoon in February, he drove to Jeff's old warehouse, which had since changed ownership. The new manager vaguely recalled he moved out fast, didn't say goodbye to anyone, sold his old Chevy cheap to a coworker, said he wanted to get out of the area. In Fort Collins, people gradually forgot the name Jeff Connolly. Elena's neighbors returned to normal life. The memorial photos at the veterinary clinic where she worked were taken down after a few weeks. The press no longer mentioned the Horsetooth Reservoir accident. It was just a small line in the Department of Transportation statistics. However, in the records storage room of the Larimer County Sheriff's Office, the file labeled Case Number 10013 was placed in the Closed Case 2010 section. The cover clearly read, "Marston, Elena, death by accidental drowning." Inside, besides the forensic report, there was a small piece of paper clipped at the end, Herrera's handwritten note: possible scene staging, final contact with Jeff Connolly, re-examine with new DNA technology. For Herrera, that note was like a silent commitment. He no longer had the authority to investigate, but he quietly kept tabs on news about Jeff. Once he contacted an old colleague in Colorado Springs to check up on him, only to receive the answer, he rents a small apartment on the east side, works for a shipping company. No violations. Herrera recorded the information, then closed his notebook. Years passed, and work engrossed him in other cases, late-night emergency calls, thick reports. But sometimes, when driving past the Horsetooth Reservoir during patrol, he would still look toward Satanka Cove, where Elena's Volvo was once pulled out. The feeling of incompleteness lingered in his mind like an old ache. Later that year, Herrera was promoted and transferred to head the cold case unit. On the day he moved offices, he coincidentally saw Elena's file again. He opened it, reading every line, name, date, time, coordinates, then stopped at the conclusion: no evidence of criminal activity found. Below that line was his own signature, signed out of procedural compliance rather than belief. Herrera slowly drew a small line next to it and added in red pen, "Case unresolved in principle." Outside the hallway, the afternoon light slanted through the dusty window pane. Old files, stacked high on the shelves, each a piece of unanswered past. File 10113 sat among hundreds of others, looking unremarkable. But to Herrera, it was like a door left ajar, never truly locked. In southern Colorado, Jeff Connolly began a new life. He rented a small apartment, didn't make friends, didn't join the community, and wasn't on social media. Neighbors described him as quiet, polite, but always kept his windows closed even in hot weather. Occasionally someone saw him driving to nearby reservoirs, standing and staring at the water for a long time, then leaving. 10 years later, after Herrera had retired, people no longer mentioned that name. To the investigative agency, the Elena Marston case was just an old file in cold storage. No one pursued it, no one remembered it. But for Herrera, sometimes on sleepless nights, the image of the Volvo sinking in the ice, and Jeff Connolly's cold eyes, reappeared clearly, as if the case was still waiting to be reopened. The case file, bearing the code 10113, lay dormant in the cold storage of the Larimer Police Department, covered in dust, as thick as the memories of those who once spoke of it. Life in Fort Collins went on. New officers didn't even know that a woman named Elena had vanished that winter. Only occasionally, when another drowning occurred, a few older police officers would remark, like the Marston case years ago, and then fall silent. Far away in Colorado Springs, where he began his new life, Jeff Connolly also gradually faded from his old acquaintance. He worked for a small transportation company, driving delivery trucks between states. His tax records were regular, he had no criminal record, and no traffic violations. Neighbors described him as mild-mannered, quiet, but with eyes that never looked straight. His rented apartment was on the ground floor, the windows always curtained, and he rarely left home, except for work, or a solitary walk around nearby Prospect Lake. Things remained quiet until May 2018, when Jeff was admitted to Memorial Central Hospital, with a diagnosis of stage 4 lung cancer. The disease was rapid and cruel. He lived alone, with no wife, children or relatives, so almost no one came to visit. According to the treating nurse, Jeff was a remarkably quiet patient. He didn't complain, didn't ask questions, only requested one thing, to sit by the window where he could see the lake. One of the nurses recalled, every morning he would sit and stare at the lake for a long time, eyes wide open, unblinking. When I asked if he was afraid of water, he just gave a faint smile and said, "No, I just think sometimes people don't die because of water, but because they can't leave it." The quote sent a shiver down her spine, but she quickly forgot it. Jeff died in early September, at the age of 47. No one came to claim the body. The hospital performed a cremation and scattered his ashes in the Arkansas River, following the regulations for the unclaimed. The medical record noted briefly, cause of death, respiratory failure, metastatic lung cancer. To society, his death was just a small line in the obituary ledger. No one knew or cared that the man was once the prime suspect in an unsolved case. In Fort Collins, Tom Herrera had been retired for 3 years. He lived with his wife in the suburbs, spending most of his time gardening and reading old reports, a hard-to-break habit for a man who had spent half his life immersed in case file. One late autumn afternoon, he received a call from an old friend in the CBI force. "Do you remember the name Jeff Connolly? Hard to forget. He's dead. Lung cancer." No next of kin. Herrera was silent for a long moment. He still remembered Jeff's evasive gaze during the interrogation in 2010. The way he spoke about Elena, as if it were a trivial, old matter. Now the man was dead, taking all the answers to the grave with him. A few weeks later, a former colleague sent Herrera a local Colorado Springs newspaper. In the news snippets section, there was a short paragraph. Jeff Connolly, 47, passed away on September 2 at Memorial Central Hospital, after a prolonged illness. No known relatives. Friends reported he was a private person who loved nature and often spent time by the lake. Below it there was a small anecdote from a man who lived in the same apartment complex. An old gentleman who had chatted with Jeff a few times. He often talked about water, said water kept secrets better than soul. Once he joked, "If I have to die, I want to die in the water, so no one has to find me." I didn't think he was serious. Reading that line, Herrera let out a soft breath and leaned back in his chair. He recognized the familiar feeling, the helplessness of a man who had missed the only chance to know the truth. All he had left was a cold case file, and an intuition that had never been proven. That afternoon Herrera walked along the stream behind his house, watching the water flow in the sun. In the wind, he heard a faint echo of the old years, the sound of the crane pulling the car from the lake, the brief report, and the eyes of a man who had lied without blinking. The Elena Marston case file still rested in the cold storage of Larimer County, and now the only person ever suspected, Jeff Connolly, was gone, taking with him all the things he had tried to find. But Herrera still believed that deep in the man's memory, the answer existed, only no one would ever have the chance to hear it. 12 years after Elena Marston's death, Fort Collins had changed significantly. The residential area expanded, Horsetooth Lake now had new walking paths, and few people remembered the 2010 accident that once caused a stir. But in another office, more than 100 miles away, the Colorado Bureau of Investigation, CBI, was starting a new program, Project Echo, a review of all cold cases pending for more than 10 years, with the hope of using advanced DNA technology to re-examine evidence once considered too small, too damaged. Investigator Sarah Neumann, 29, was one of the young faces involved in the project. She had just graduated from a training program in forensic genealogy, a technique for comparing DNA against a genealogical database to trace the biological relatives of a suspect. While reviewing the list of old Larimer County cases, she stopped at the file coded T. The file cover was yellowed, but inside, a handwritten note caught her attention. Hair sample insufficient for analysis. Revisit when DNA technology improves. Below was the signature, T. Herrera. Sarah opened each page of the report, meticulously reading statements, crime scene photos, and the forensic conclusion. The story of the missing woman. The car submerged under ice, the bruise on her neck, and the suspicious colleague. It all made her feel this was not an accident. She wrote a short report to her superiors, proposing to include the evidence sample from the Marston case in the new generation DNA testing list. The proposal was immediately approved, partly because testing costs had dropped sharply, and partly because the case had enough data to test the genealogy model. However, there was an obstacle. The physical evidence of the Marston case had been in storage for over a decade. When she arrived at the old evidence vault in Denver, it took Sarah almost half a day to search. Finally, in a small box labeled Marston Vol. 3, hair sample, she found the sealed bag containing the dark brown hair strand collected by Dr. Lisa Grant from under the victim's fingernail. The seal was intact, the ink faded. Sarah put on gloves, carefully transferred the sample into a new preservation tube, and prepared the shipping manifest. Before sending it off, she decided to contact the person who had investigated the case, retired Lieutenant Tom Herrera. After a few calls, she found him in suburban Loveland, where he lived with his wife and spent time gardening and reading. The meeting took place in a small cafe brightened by soft sunlight. Sarah opened, "I'm participating in the Project Echo program. Your name appeared in a 2010 case, Elena Marston." Herrera looked up, his eyes briefly surprised, then dimmed. "I thought no one remembered that case anymore. We found your note about the unanalyzed hair sample. I want to ask your permission to collaborate with you, if you agree, to revive this case." Herrera was silent for a long time, then nodded. "If you plan to do it, then see it through to the end. I've been waiting for that answer for 12 years. They sat for nearly 2 hours, Sarah noting down details that the old file did not show, how the driver's seat was pulled back, the position of the parking brake, Jeff's expression during the interrogation. Herrera recounted everything with the memory of someone who had never forgot. "I knew he was guilty," he said. "It's just that at the time, science couldn't help me." After the meeting, Sarah returned to the office, completing the procedure to send the hair sample to the Golden DNA Lab, one of the first centers in Colorado licensed for genetic genealogy analysis. In the accompanying file, she clearly noted, "Objective, identify the identity of the second person present at the scene, based on biological material collected from under the victim's fingernail." As the sample was transported, Sarah stood by the lab's glass wall, watching the specialized truck leave the lot. A mix of nervousness and a strange feeling filled her, as if she was reconnecting a broken thread from the past. In her mind, the image of the young woman in the car, sinking under the ice, repeated, blending with Herrera's low voice, "No one dies in a perfect accident like that." That evening, Herrera received a short call. On the other end, Sarah said in a firm voice, "The hair sample has been sent. They said the results will be ready in 6 weeks. He gave a slight laugh. 6 weeks? I've waited 12 years. You just do it, Sarah. I'll be here waiting." On Sarah's desk at the CBI office, the file 1011-3 lay open, the first page bearing a new label she had affixed. Status, reopened, forensic genealogy under review. The Elena Marston case, thought to be buried under the ice of time, had just been reopened, thanks to the scrawled note of a man who years ago believed that the truth is never buried forever. 6 weeks after the hair sample was sent to the Golden DNA Lab, The results notification was delivered directly to the CBI office in Denver. Investigator Sarah Neumann opened the sealed documents, her palm slightly trembling, not just from nerves, but because she knew this could be the turning point in the case that the elderly Lieutenant Tom Herrera had pursued for over a decade. The report was 12 pages long, but by reading only the first 3 lines, Sarah understood that everything was about to change. DNA sample collected from under victim Elena Marston's fingernail shows a 99.98% match with the genetic profile of Lucas Connolly, born 1994, the biological son of Jeff Connolly, who passed away in Sarah sat in silence. Lucas, Jeff's only son, currently lived in Pueblo, nearly 300 kilometers from Fort Collins. According to civil records, he had no criminal history, worked as a mechanical technician, and had served in the National Guard. She reread the next paragraph. Genealogical DNA analysis results indicate a direct father-son relationship. As Jeff Connolly has passed away, the probability that the sample source belongs to him is 90. The name that seemed buried with time now reappeared clearly, this time not as a suspicion, but as a scientific fact. Sarah picked up the phone and called Herrera. On the other end, his voice was hoarse but full of emotion. "It's him, isn't it?" "Yes, Lieutenant. The results confirm it. Jeff's DNA is a perfect match." There was a long silence on the other end. Then Herrera just whispered, "I knew it. Thank you, Sarah. Thank you for not letting her be forgotten." But as Sarah carefully read the appendix of the report, the detail that caught her attention was not Jeff's name, but another clue. The lab noted that the hair sample under Elena's fingernail contained 2 separate DNA strands. One male, matching Jeff Connolly, and one unidentified female. She frowned, reading the result again to ensure it wasn't a technical error. The analyst's note stated clearly, the second sample likely comes from epithelial cells, does not match the victim, insufficient data for lineage tracing, but enough to determine gender. Sarah leaned back in her chair, her mind racing. If there was another woman's DNA, it meant Jeff did not act alone. An accomplice, or someone present at the scene after Elena died, perhaps the person who helped stage the accident years ago. She reopened the old file. In the 2010 interrogation transcript, there was a note by Herrera. Jeff had a close relationship with a warehouse employee named Bruce Tanner. They often carpooled to work, sometimes appeared together after hours. Sarah marked the name with a red pen. She continued to check the National CODIS DNA database, looking for a match for the female genetic sequence in the hair sample. There was no match. This made the case even more complicated. Who was this woman? An acquaintance of Jeff's? An intimate partner of Elena? Or someone who helped Jeff cover up the crime? That afternoon, Sarah drove to Herrera's house with a copy of the results. He welcomed her in the garden, still with a slow gait, but with noticeably brighter eyes. She handed him the file, her voice firm. "We have Jeff, but there's one more person." "A woman." Herrera frowned, looking at the paper, then gave a faint smile. "I always believed he couldn't have staged that alone. No one can drive the car, lock the doors and create a bruise on the victim's neck without leaving traces. He had help." Sarah nodded. She knew that from this moment on, the Elena Marston case was no longer a forgotten murder. It had just entered a new phase of investigation, where the truth would be pulled out from the remaining fragments of DNA evidence that time was thought to have erased. Before leaving, Herrera told her something Sarah would always remember. "You know, the truth is like water. You can freeze it, but at some point it will melt and flow back to where it began." Sarah returned to her car, looking out at the Fort Collins skyline, colored by the sunset. In the dim light, the file on the passenger seat was open, revealing the bold print, "Case." It took 3 more weeks after the first results were announced for the Golden DNA lab to complete the extended analysis of the second DNA sample, the bizarre female genetic sequence that had previously confused Sarah Neumann and Tom Herrera. But when the report landed on her desk, the first surprise was, it wasn't a female sample. Deeper analysis using whole genome sequencing technology showed that the second sample was in fact male DNA. But the initial reading was skewed due to severe cell decomposition. When cross-referenced with the genealogy database, the genetic sequence quickly found a partial match with an old Wyoming state record. Bruce Tanner, 51, who had worked as a warehouse operator at the same company as Jeff Connolly. Sarah looked at the name, recalling Herrera's old note in case file 10-101. Jeff was close with Bruce Tanner, often commuted together, appeared together outside of work hours. Now that seemingly small detail suddenly became the completed piece for a picture that had been unfinished for 12 years. Bruce Tanner had an assault conviction in 2012, after a bar fight in Greeley left a man severely injured. The DNA trace from that incident was stored in the cottage system, which is what led to his accidental discovery this time. Additionally, Tanner had been a witness in another missing person case, but was never charged. His personal file noted that he lived alone, had unstable employment, moved frequently, and showed signs of anger control disorder. When Sarah reported the information back to Herrera, he just quietly said, "I told you Jeff couldn't have done it alone." The CBI immediately opened a full investigation into Tanner's movements. Old cell phone location data, extracted from a carrier backup, showed that the signals from both Tanner's and Jeff Connolly's phones appeared within the coverage area of the BTS tower, near Horsetooth Reservoir, on the night of January 9, 2010, only 8 minutes apart. Both devices subsequently lost signal at the exact same time, 12:03 a.m., matching the time when Elena's final call ended. The evidence became even more compelling when Sarah found an old Longmont police file containing a traffic ticket for Tanner's black Chevrolet pickup truck, which had been stopped and inspected on the outskirts of Fort Collins 2 weeks after the crime. The report described the undercarriage as covered in the characteristic thick mud of the area around the reservoir. At the time, the Elena Marston case had been ruled an accident, so the coincidence was not investigated further. Now the pieces fit together almost perfectly. Tanner and Jeff were close, worked at the same warehouse. Their phones appeared together near the reservoir the night Elena disappeared. Tanner's DNA was found in the sample under Elena's fingernail, and his black pickup was seen in the area immediately after the crime. Sarah compiled all the evidence and submitted it to the Larimer County District Attorney to request an arrest warrant for Bruce Tanner on charges of co-conspirator murder in the first degree and concealment of criminal evidence. The DA read the file all afternoon, then looked up and nodded, "You have sufficient grounds. Go for it." That night Sarah called Herrera to deliver the news. On the other end, his voice was low and slightly trembling. "I guessed right, didn't I?" "You did. He's the other one." A long silence followed. Then he spoke softly. "You know, when I saw him standing next to Jeff in that warehouse all those years ago, I saw the exact same look in his eyes. The kind of look only found in those who know they've just crossed a line." The next morning, the CBI coordinated with Colorado Springs Police and Larimer County to deploy the arrest plan. Tanner was living alone in a cabin on the south outskirts, where he worked fixing small machinery. The warrant was signed at 3 unmarked special operations vehicles parked 2 blocks from his house. As the team approached, Tanner was making coffee in the kitchen. The police knocked, read the warrant, and he only managed one sentence. "I knew this day would come." As he was being led out in handcuffs, Bruce Tanner's eyes were cold, offering no resistance, asking no reason. Only as he walked past the yard did he turn his head, looking toward the image of a lake on the living room wall, an old photograph of Horsetooth Reservoir, where Elena Marston had died. For Sarah it was the moment she understood that case 10-11-13 had finally found the breath of justice, something Tom Herrera had waited nearly 13 years to hear simply described in 2 words: arrest. Fog blanketed the southern outskirts of Colorado Springs, the streetlights reflecting off the damp rooftops. On the small street named Cedar Grove, 3 unmarked SUVs parked quietly in front of the log cabin, with a decaying porch. Inside, Bruce Tanner was preparing breakfast. A knock sounded on the door, sharp, simultaneous. When the door swung open, 4 CBI agents and local police officers stepped in, the command clear: "Bruce Tanner, you are under arrest on suspicion of murder." The man froze, his hands still gripping the coffee mug. His face turned pale. He didn't resist, only whispered, "I knew you would come." While Tanner was being escorted to the car, the forensics team proceeded to search the entire house. The interior was cluttered, filled with the smell of motor oil and cigarette smoke. The garage in the back was the first area checked. There they discovered an old black Chevrolet Silverado, the body rusted, the tires caked with a dark gray dried mud. The license plate had been changed, but the VIN matched the registration data police had recorded in the old file from the company where Tanner had worked. Lifting the truck bed cover, technicians found a layer of fine dirt mixed with sand, covering a rotted rubber mat. The pungent, damp smell wafted up, reminiscent of the lakeside. A technician knelt down, collected a sample and performed a quick comparison using a portable sediment scanner. The result was almost immediate. The composition matched the soil sample from the Satanka Cove area of Horsetooth Reservoir. The piece of the puzzle that Herrera had searched for 13 years finally appeared, right beneath the dirty mat of an old truck. The deeper the search, the more strange traces the police discovered. In a plastic box hidden behind a tool shelf, they found a black zipper pull, old jeans stained with mud, and a pair of size 11 leather boots, matching the size of the faint shoe print photographed at the scene. Everything was sealed in evidence bags. In the corner, a wooden crate held yellowed papers, including a notebook with a few lines scribbled. Jeff said, "Only water can keep a secret." A message was immediately sent back to the CBI office in Denver. Sarah Neumann was part of the forensics team, standing still, looking at the items wrapped in thick plastic bags. Beside her, Tom Herrera, now a special consultant for the CBI, was silent, only looking at the leather boots on the table. "I told you, he never throws away the past," he murmured. Tanner was taken straight to the interrogation room in Denver. Sitting across from Sarah and Herrera, he maintained a calm demeanor, his eyes slightly fixed on the ceiling. His first question was not about the charge, but "Jeff is dead, right?" Sarah nodded. "He's dead, but his traces are still here. And so are yours." Tanner let out a dry, bitter laugh. "I didn't kill her, I was just present. Jeff said he needed to talk to Elena. I went along to keep him company. He got mad. I didn't think he'd actually do it." Sarah placed the photo of the car being pulled from the lake on the table. "You helped him stage the scene. You pushed the car into the water." Tanner was silent. The light reflected off the metal table, illuminating the beads of sweat on his forehead. "I only helped hold the door, that's all." In the observation room, Herrera stood behind the one-way glass, his hand clutching the old notebook. He looked at the face of the man he had suspected for 13 years, now stripped of arrogance, showing only the callousness of someone who had run out of excuses. When Sarah left the room, Herrera stepped in to sit across from Tanner. "You're right," he said gravely. "Jeff is dead, but the truth is still alive." Tanner didn't answer, only bowed his head, his eyes cloudy. In the evening, the search report was completed. The evidence, the zipper pull, clothes, leather boots, and soil sample from the truck bed, all matched the data saved in the CBI officially confirmed. Those objects were used during the process of moving or disposing of Elena Marston's vehicle. In the hallway, Sarah and Herrera signed the protocol together. He turned and said softly, 13 years. See, water can't keep a secret forever." Sarah only nodded. In her mind, the image of Horsetooth Reservoir from all those years ago appeared, flat, still, but now those layers of water had been stirred up, giving a voice back to the dead. After nearly 3 days of continuous detention and interrogation, Bruce Tanner finally opened up. He had been silent for hours, only staring at the ceiling, sometimes offering a slight, cynical laugh when investigators asked questions. But when Sarah Neumann placed the photo of the silver Volvo S40 being pulled from Horsetooth Reservoir in front of him, Tanner's eyes suddenly changed. He looked at it for a long time, then uttered a short, hoarse sentence. "I was there. I didn't want to be, but I was there." The air in the interrogation room thickened. Sarah nodded softly, turned on the recorder, her voice calm. "Tell us everything, from the beginning." Tanner closed his eyes for a moment, then spoke slowly, as if each sentence was a burden. "Jeff and I worked together at the warehouse. He treated me like a little brother. That night, Jeff said he had to meet Elena, and needed me to go along. He said she betrayed him, wanted to leave him and go back to her husband. I didn't ask much, just drove him to Fort Collins. They arrived near the reservoir around midnight. Jeff said Elena had agreed to meet in the lot next to Satanka Cove. When they got there, Elena's Volvo was already parked, its headlights shining onto the water. She got out of the car, Buddy was running around. Tanner recounted. Jeff walked up, said something, then started yelling. I heard a slap, her scream. She tried to leave, he grabbed her arm. They struggled. She fell, hitting her head on the car door. I didn't think she died, After that moment, Jeff became hysterical. He checked Elena's pulse, then turned and said, "We have to do something. No one can." Tanner recounted, trembling. "I was scared. I told him to call the police, but he said he'd pin everything on me, because of my prior conviction. I didn't dare argue." According to the confession, Jeff ordered him to bring his truck over, forced Tanner to help put Elena in the driver's seat, and fasten her seatbelt. He released the parking brake, adjusted the seat all the way back, and said, "The water will do the rest." The two pushed the Volvo down the slope leading to the lake. The car slid slowly, the tires grinding on the gravel, then vanished in the darkness. Buddy jumped in after it, Tanner said softly, his voice fading. The dog kept barking, then it was pulled under. I could still hear it until the water swallowed everything. Sarah remained silent, just listening. Tanner continued that after the car sank, Jeff threatened him to keep silent about everything. He said if I opened my mouth, he'd tell them I was the killer. I didn't dare. The next morning, he washed the truck, burned the clothes and threw the boots in the dump. I kept a few things because I was afraid he'd get suspicious, but then I never dared throw them away. The investigators cross-referenced the confession with the evidence. The small dent on the driver's door was in the exact position Tanner described when Elena fell. The DNA under the victim's fingernails contained the genetic samples of both Jeff and Tanner. The dirt in the bed of the pickup truck matched the sediment from the area where they claimed to have pushed the car. Every detail matched, the pieces fitting together precisely like a picture that time had only temporarily obscured, but could not erase. Herrera, who had spent the night recording the first notes in 2010, now stood in the surveillance room quietly listening to the entire confession through the loudspeaker. When Tanner got to the part where we pushed the car into the water, he nodded slightly, his eyes shining with a mixture of sorrow and peace. Finally the truth surfaced, like the wreckage of the car pulled from the ice years ago. Tanner signed the statement after 6 hours of continuous interrogation. In the record he admitted to participating in the concealment of the crime, helping Jeff Connolly stage the scene to make it look like an accidental drowning. He denied being the mastermind, but had no way to deny his involvement. As he was led out of the room, Tanner turned back to Sarah, his voice hoarse. "If I'd known the water couldn't hide it forever, I would have stopped that night." Sarah gathered the files, carefully clipping them into the case binder. The facts were complete. Motive of jealousy, struggle leading to death, act of disposal and concealment of the crime. The CBI officially recommended prosecuting Bruce Tanner on charges of co-conspirator murder in the first degree and concealing criminal evidence. After 13 years, the Elena Marston case finally had a true confession, and justice, though delayed, had begun to take shape. Once Bruce Tanner's confession was recorded and officially signed, the CBI decided to take one more step to strengthen the prosecution's case. Although his testimony aligned with the evidence, investigators needed an objective reconstruction, something that could prove in court that the 2010 accident was not random. Therefore, the forensic experts, in collaboration with the CBI's Crime Scene Pattern Analysis Unit, executed a complete 3D simulation of the incident. The new technology allowed for a terrain recreation accurate down to the centimeter, based on geological data, GPS mapping, original crime scene photos, and sediment samples collected from Satanka Cove. The model displayed the steep dirt road leading down to the lake, recreating the nighttime lighting and air humidity, similar to January 20. When the simulation began, the silver Volvo S40 appeared on screen, stopped in the empty dirt area, its headlights casting a faint glow onto the water. The technical team entered parameters into the system based on Tanner's statement, the angle of the push, the distance, the necessary force, and the ground slope. When the run simulation command was activated, the car began to move slowly, exactly as he described, rolling to the right, tilting slightly to the left, and then gradually sliding down into the lake. The data showed the car moving at approximately 4.7 km rate. The angle of descent into the water was narrow, failing to generate an impact force sufficient to deploy the airbags, perfectly matching the results of the 20. On the screen the car slowly sank, the front wheels hitting the mud, the body tilting, then disappearing into the 8-meter deep water. As the final section of the body vanished, the forensic specialist standing behind Sarah quietly said, "If his testimony is correct, Elena might have still been alive when the car went into the water." The statement silenced the entire room. Herrera, who had been invited to attend as a consultant, stood in the back, his eyes glued to the screen. He saw everything that had once haunted him, the cold bank, the black water, the dazzling reflection of the lights. But this time, every piece had a reason. What he had suspected years ago was now demonstrated by data, no longer an instinct, but physical evidence. The next simulation focused on the impact mark on the driver's side door. The technician reconstructed the image of Elena standing next to the car, the positions of Jeff and Tanner, and the distance when the altercation occurred. Based on the victim's height and the direction of the fall, the simulation showed her head impacting the upper edge of the car door, matching exactly the actual dent recorded in the old crime scene photograph. The model also recreated the probability of Buddy the dog, following the car when the door was open, falling into the water with his owner, which matched the location of the animal's remains found inside the vehicle. The detailed analysis report clearly stated, the factors concerning the vehicle's trajectory, the slope of the bank, the angle of descent, and the impact severity are 100% consistent with Bruce Tanner's testimony. There is no physical basis to suggest the vehicle slid into the lake on its own. The scene was intentionally staged. When the results were presented at the Larimer County District Attorney's Office, DA Evelyn Clark watched the entire simulation, then leaned back in her chair, contemplating. It all checks out, she said. And Jeff Connolly was the one orchestrating this. Tanner was just an accomplice. Sarah nodded, opening the conclusion. Jeff is the principal perpetrator. Tanner is an accomplice involved in transport, concealment, and staging the scene. With the 3D simulation and the confirmed DNA sequence, the prosecution file was considered complete. Herrera sat in the corner of the room, silent as the young investigators discussed the case. He remembered 2010 when his superiors dismissed his case, simply because of a lack of scientific evidence. Now science itself had given him back what he had believed for 13 years. Elena did not die in an accident, she was murdered, and the killer had been identified. As she left the room, Sarah gave him a slight smile. "We did it, sir," Herrera replied, his voice hoarse but warm. "No, you did it. I was just the one who believed, even when no one believed me." Outside the window, the afternoon sun slanted through the CBI building, reflecting onto the final frame of the paused 3D model, the car resting silently at the bottom of the lake, surrounded by transparent ripples. Finally, the truth surfaced from the very place that had hidden it the deepest, the water's surface. A few months after the simulation results were finalized, Bruce Tanner officially appeared in court at the Larimer County Courthouse. The courtroom was packed with reporters, citizens, and familiar faces who had been connected to the case for 13 years. In the front row, Tom Herrera sat motionless, his hand tightly grasping his worn old notebook. Beside him was Sarah Neumann, the young investigator who had become the central figure in resurrecting the case. As the judge read the indictment, Tanner bowed his head, his voice level and expressionless. "I plead guilty to the charge of accessory to first-degree murder and concealment of criminal evidence." The guilty plea brought absolute silence to the room. According to the plea agreement, his sentence was reduced for cooperation and for fully disclosing the events of the incident, in exchange for a life sentence without parole. There were no more justifications, no more denials. Every detail had been proven by DNA, the 3D simulation, and his own testimony. The prosecution team presented the investigation file again. Jeff Connolly was the one who directly caused Elena Marston's death in a fit of jealousy, and then worked with Tanner to stage the scene to look like a water accident. When the murder occurred, Elena was struck on the head, lost consciousness, and was then pushed into the lake with the car. Every action was intentional. And even though Jeff had died in 2018, the CBI officially identified him as the principal offender in case 1011-13. As the judge read the conclusion, the midday sun streamed through the narrow window, casting light onto Herrera's aging face. He quietly bowed his head, closing his eyes. 13 years ago, he was forced to sign the traffic accident report, and now the court had officially erased that notation from the record. Elena Marston did not die in an accident. She was the victim of a crime. Outside the courthouse, the Colorado Bureau of Investigation (CBI) held a press conference to announce the investigation's results. The podium was placed in the center of the room, behind it a backdrop printed with the words "Justice for Elena Marston, Case 1011-13." Sarah stood next to the CBI representative, presenting a summary of the case-solving process, from discovering Herrera's note, recovering the old DNA sample, to tracking down Bruce Tanner using genealogy and the 3D simulation. She concluded with a sentence that quieted everyone. "Justice sometimes just sleeps, but it never vanishes." At the back of the auditorium, a few of Elena's old friends quietly held hands. They had waited over a decade to hear the 3 words, "Case solved." A reporter asked, "Why was this case reopened after all these years?" Sarah replied, "Because someone believed, and never stopped believing, that this was not an accident." Her gaze shifted toward Herrera, and he responded with a slight nod. After the press conference, the CBI officially closed case file 10-11-3. The final report clearly stated, victim, Elena Marston, 36 years old, principal perpetrator Jeff Connolly, deceased, accomplice Bruce Tanner, sentenced to life imprisonment, verification method genealogical DNA, 3D reconstruction, testimony consistent with physical evidence, case status, solved after 13 years. That afternoon, Sarah brought a copy of the report to Herrera. They stood by Horsetooth Reservoir, the wind creating ripples on the water's surface where the Volvo had once rested deep below. He placed the paper into a plastic envelope and whispered, bowing his head, "She's finally been called by her proper name, a victim, not an accident." Sarah smiled, looking at the peaceful lake. "Now you can finally rest easy." Herrera shook his head. "No, justice for one person is never the end. It only reminds us to keep believing, even when everything is submerged underwater." In the distance, the sunset cast a slant of light across the lake, reflecting brightly like the final streak of a long story. After 13 years, the Elena Marston case officially closed, not with silence, but with the truth. News of the Elena Marston case being solved spread faster than anyone imagined. When the CBI released the official results, major newspapers across Colorado simultaneously ran headlines, "Cold Case 2010 finally solved. After 13 years, DNA genealogy brings justice." The evening news program in Denver dedicated a 10-minute segment to recounting the investigation's journey. The anchor spoke with emotion. A case once considered an accident has now become a testament to the power of technology and human persistence. In Fort Collins, where Elena once lived, no one was indifferent. Residents living near Maple Street, where the Marston family's small house still stands, brought flowers to place outside the gate. An old photo of Elena, taken when she was a veterinary technician, was reprinted and placed in a simple wooden frame. Beneath it was a handwritten note. She was found and justice followed. Local newspapers emphasized the role of genealogy DNA technology, a method that had helped solve many cold cases in the United States, but was rarely applied successfully in Colorado. A reporter for the Denver Post called it a victory for science and memory. The article highlighted the contrast: a woman forgotten beneath the cold lake, and a team of young investigators who pulled her name back from the darkness. Sarah Neumann became the face of the new generation of investigators. In interviews, she always mentioned her predecessor. If it weren't for Mr. Herrera and his note, this case would have remained dormant forever. It all started with one person's belief that the truth was still there. Herrera, though over 70, remained humble. In a conversation with a local station, he only said, "I wasn't seeking justice for myself, but for her." A closed case doesn't mean we won. It just means we no longer owe anyone. Elena's family, her sister and now grown nephew, held a small memorial service by Horsetooth Reservoir, where everything began. They released flowers onto the water's surface, each petal floating away then sinking, as if restoring peace to the deceased. Sarah and Herrera attended the service, standing silently watching the lake shimmer in the sunset. When Elena's sister came to shake their hands, she simply said, "Thank you for not forgetting." Following the case, the CBI decided to incorporate case file 10-11-3 into its official training program on handling cold cases. The case name, the Marston Investigation, was included in the internal curriculum, illustrating the process of coordinating traditional forensic analysis and genealogy DNA technology. A class of young investigators was sent to Fort Collins to re-examine the scene, learning how to see clues in things that seemed to be gone. On social media, thousands of people shared Elena's story, not just as a solved case, but as a reminder that truth is never completely buried. One user wrote, "It's strange, I've driven past that lake so many times, never knowing it once held the secret of a soul at its bottom." When everything settled down, Sarah returned to the CBI office. On her desk was a group photo, taken at the press conference, Herrera standing beside her, smiling kindly, behind them the sign for justice for Elena Marston. She gently touched the frame, recalling the months of digging through old files, the nights reading DNA reports, and the initial feeling of finding Herrera's faint handwritten note. That afternoon, she drove out to the lake. The Colorado sky was clear, the water's surface calm. Sarah stood for a long time looking toward Setanka Cove, where 13 years ago the car sank. She knew that in every ripple of the water, a piece of the truth had been restored. Herrera once said, "Justice doesn't always arrive on time, but when it does, it illuminates even the darkest places." Now looking at the lake reflecting the afternoon sun, Sarah understood that those words were not just for one case, but for all the people who believed that no matter how long it was buried under the cold water, justice can be late, but it is never lost. 12 years after Elena Marston's death, Fort Collins had changed significantly. The residential area expanded. Horsetooth Lake now had new walking paths. And few people remembered the 2010 accident that once caused a stir. But in another office, more than 100 miles away, the Colorado Bureau of Investigation, CBI, was starting a new program, Project Echo, a review of all cold cases pending for more than 10 years, with the hope of using advanced DNA technology to re-examine evidence once considered too small, too damaged. Investigator Sarah Neumann, 29, was one of the young faces involved in the project. She had just graduated from a training program in forensic genealogy, a technique for comparing DNA against a genealogical database to trace the biological relatives of a suspect. While reviewing the list of old Larimer County cases, she stopped at the file coded T. The file cover was yellowed, but inside, a handwritten note caught her attention. Hair sample insufficient for analysis. Revisit when DNA technology improves. Below was the signature, T. Herrera. Sarah opened each page of the report, meticulously reading statements, crime scene photos, and the forensic conclusion. The story of the missing woman. The car submerged under ice, the bruise on her neck, and the suspicious colleague. It all made her feel this was not an accident. She wrote a short report to her superiors, proposing to include the evidence sample from the Marston case in the new generation DNA testing list. The proposal was immediately approved, partly because testing costs had dropped sharply, and partly because the case had enough data to test the genealogy model. However, there was an obstacle. The physical evidence of the Marston case had been in storage for over a decade. When she arrived at the old evidence vault in Denver, it took Sarah almost half a day to search. Finally, in a small box labeled Marston Vol. 3, hair sample, she found the sealed bag containing the dark brown hair strand collected by Dr. Lisa Grant from under the victim's fingernail. The seal was intact, the ink faded. Sarah put on gloves, carefully transferred the sample into a new preservation tube, and prepared the shipping manifest. Before sending it off, she decided to contact the person who had investigated the case, retired Lieutenant Tom Herrera. After a few calls, she found him in suburban Loveland, where he lived with his wife and spent time gardening and reading. The meeting took place in a small cafe brightened by soft sunlight. Sarah opened, "I'm participating in the Project Echo program. Your name appeared in a 2010 case, Elena Marston." Herrera looked up, his eyes briefly surprised, then dimmed. "I thought no one remembered that case anymore. We found your note about the unanalyzed hair sample. I want to ask your permission to collaborate with you, if you agree, to revive this case." Herrera was silent for a long time, then nodded. "If you plan to do it, then see it through to the end. I've been waiting for that answer for 12 years. They sat for nearly 2 hours, Sarah noting down details that the old file did not show, how the driver's seat was pulled back, the position of the parking brake, Jeff's expression during the interrogation. Herrera recounted everything with the memory of someone who had never forgot. "I knew he was guilty," he said. "It's just that at the time, science couldn't help me." After the meeting, Sarah returned to the office, completing the procedure to send the hair sample to the Golden DNA Lab, one of the first centers in Colorado licensed for genetic genealogy analysis. In the accompanying file she clearly noted, "Objective, identify the identity of the second person present at the scene, based on biological material collected from under the victim's fingernail." As the sample was transported, Sarah stood by the lab's glass wall, watching the specialized truck leave the lot. A mix of nervousness and a strange feeling filled her, as if she was reconnecting a broken thread from the past. In her mind, the image of the young woman in the car, sinking under the ice, repeated, blending with Herrera's low voice. No one dies in a perfect accident like that. That evening, Herrera received a short call. On the other end, Sarah said in a firm voice, "The hair sample has been sent. They said the results will be ready in 6 weeks." He gave a slight laugh. 6 weeks? I've waited 12 years. You just do it, Sarah. I'll be here waiting. On Sarah's desk at the CBI office, the file 1011-3 lay open, the first page bearing a new label she had affixed. Status: reopened, forensic genealogy under review. The Elena Marston case, thought to be buried under the ice of time, had just been reopened, thanks to the scrawled note of a man who years ago believed that the truth is never buried forever. 6 weeks after the hair sample was sent to the Golden DNA lab, the results notification was delivered directly to the CBI office in Denver. Investigator Sarah Neumann opened the sealed documents, her palm slightly trembling, not just from nerves, but because she knew this could be the turning point in the case that the elderly Lieutenant Tom Herrera had pursued for over a decade. The report was 12 pages long, but by reading only the first 3 lines, Sarah understood that everything was about to change. DNA sample collected from under victim Elena Marston's fingernail shows a 99.98% match with the genetic profile of Lucas Connolly, born 1994, the biological son of Jeff Connolly, who passed away in